episode of the Old Timers Comic Book Show, where the hosts aren't old, but the comics most certainly are. Now, we are taking a look at a very strange style of comics this time around. So we have to have some strange people to do it. Joining me is the Professor, and of course, the 30th Crusade. Gentlemen!
Hey, what's up?
What's up? Week 3 is over. Football season starts.
Yay!
Can't wait. Bring
We
it
can
on.
see who our lineups are on Tuesday.
Free. Yeah, looking forward to that.
Can you guys sense my excitement?
I can sense something.
My spider sense is going off.
My spider sense is dead. Like 13's excitement. All right, so the strange world of comics we are going to look into, and back before Lost in Space, Star Trek, and Batman 66 all brought color to the world. World was black and white, right?
That's hey, when we talk about us not being old, and we all remember black and white TV. So
hell yeah. I was surprised when I saw the Lone Ranger in color for the first time. I was like, why is he wearing blue? What's that all about? Some cowboy you are.
Well, my first exposure to Superman was The Adventures of Superman with George Reeves, which was black and white.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know Superman was blue and red until I saw a comic strip, but I saw him on TV first.
Okay, cool. I think we still had black and white TV all the way up until around the mid 80s. A little portable thing it was.
Mhm.
Brilliant. Yeah, cool. It was for the home computer in my bedroom, also known as watch Star Trek on Thursdays at BBC 2, 6 o'clock. So,
My dad saved an old black and white TV for a bit through the mid 80s, and that's how I used to watch my Yankee games in black and white.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
I remember watching the Red Sox in black and white too.
How'd you know the Red Sox?
Because I was told they were called the Red Sox. Said it right on their jerseys.
Yeah, it said it right there. We've segued again, but the way I remember as a kid, we were watching the snooker. You know what snooker is, like billiards, but
I thought you were talking about the wrestler.
No, snooker. And the commentator went something along the lines of, "For those of you who don't know, the last red ball. Sorry, if those of you watching the black and white TV, the last red ball is behind the green ball."
What?
Exactly. You're like, thanks.
Doesn't help.
Doesn't help. All right. Okay. So we're talking about black and white comics. Now, these aren't a new phenomenon for me over in the UK. All the Marvel reprints, whether it be Star Wars, whether it be the weeklies, whatever it be, tended to be black and white. At least in the 70s, early 80s. I remember seeing a Spider-Man annual from the 70s, a summer special, and it was a black and white Spider-Man annual number 1. You know the Sinister Six?
Yeah.
Yeah. So black and white comics aren't a new thing over here. Were you guys, Professor, fan of black and whites?
So I never bought the black and whites just because I'd rather have them in color. But it was another way for Marvel, because Marvel tried a couple of different times to bust into the market. But it was a way for them to get more magazines, right? So they had a limited amount of color comics that they could put out because they wouldn't distribute them. But black and white magazines was the way to go, and so they started doing that.
Also, there's a creative element to this, isn't there? 13. Black and white comics tended to generate a more adult readership.
That's certainly true. And there's a couple ways to look at it. So from a publisher standpoint, it's a money saver for them to create these books, and then from an artistic standpoint, I think you can see the art better. There's not much stuff going into like pencils, like inking and coloring that could distort the original art. So I think there's that element too.
Cool. So saves money. Don't have to color it. Don't have to put the inks on. Well, I suppose you have to put the inks on. But so you're saving money on that. But
you charge more for the format.
Yeah, bigger format, more money. But also, I mean, some of the themes are quite heavy. Yeah. So I think magazines were weren't really aimed at kids.
What's the thing we talked about last episode? The comics code, right?
Yes.
No comics code. so they could do whatever they want.
I think to point exactly, as a kid, I stayed away from black and white comics. Why would I want a black and white comic? I liked all of my comic books in color, and I saw everything as, like the DC color palette of back then. You know how corny some of those were. The black and white comics were just not appealing to me. But I'm appreciating it more as an adult now than I ever did. And the content is probably more adult in some cases. And I think that speaks to exactly what you guys are saying.
I think I've told the story about how when I was a kid I managed to get a Shana, the She Devil black and white book on my birthday. My mum allowed me to buy it when I was about like 8 or 9. I thought it was like, whoa, look at this. Whoa, check it out.
It's like mom let you buy a Playboy or something.
Yeah, woo.
Yeah. I remember I had a cousin that had a couple of black and white comics, and he thought they were coloring books. That wasn't cool. That wasn't cool at all.
Yeah, well, I think we've all had that happen. If you had bought a black and white in the 70s, is that someone colored it, right? So,
all right. So we're going to look at 3 said books. We'll go recent to oldest because I can't say chronological. Definitely can't say reverse chronological. That's just like tempting the face.
just did it.
I know. Can't say infinite either. All right, so here we go. This is Eclipse the Magazine #1 from May 1981. eBay. I couldn't find this on Go Collect, so that tells you how scarce this could be. But I did manage to find a copy on eBay for around £20 plus postage and packaging. Now, I think, and 13th, this was your choice. You're going to get into this. But the wealth of creators on this book is just bonkers.
Absolutely.
Take it away.
Yeah. So starting with the cover, you have Paul Gulacy drawing. It's an awesome depiction. It's phenomenal. But let's start with this magazine. So we were mentioning the Comics Code and how it was relaxed in the 70s. So this magazine here came out in the early 80s. And this was more of creators trying to say, hey, look, forget about staying within what's left of the Comics Code. Let's just abandon it altogether and let's just do our own thing and see how that works. So here you are, and you have Eclipse. And this is, like, to Johnny's point, an all-star lineup with Jim Starlin, Steve Englehart, Marshall Rogers. Like, some of these guys, for like in Englehart and Rogers with their famous Batman run. Jim Starlin really needs no introduction. This is a way to kind of break away from the normal mold of just your typical big 2 books at the time. Also, the magazine format. So remember, in the 70s, you may have had treasury books, you may have had graphic novels. These were things that were appealing to probably older readers. So now here you have Eclipse magazine. And honestly, this cover is strictly designed to grab your attention.
Well, it's got thigh highs on, so it obviously got my attention.
and nothing else, practically.
Yeah.
My wife was like, "Oh, that's a nice picture of a horse." I'm like, "There's a horse on it? Oh, what?"
So it's an attention grabber, and it's, at the end of the day, like we always say, it's still a business, and you need eyes on something that is not your typical brand name. So you have the list of creators here. You have an awesome painting by Paul Gulacy, and then you're like wondering, okay, so I'm familiar with comics, so what is Steve Englehart and Marshall Rogers up to? What's Jim Starlin doing in here? What's P. Craig Russell doing in here? So these are people that were pretty familiar. But the other thing too is, unlike the big 2, in some cases, this book is an anthology style book. Yep. So you're thinking it's a magazine, a different format, and I may be getting more bang for my buck. Whereas I could read a regular comic book, maybe be done with it in a few minutes. This one definitely is not a quick read.
True that.
I'll delve into some of the stories here. I'm not going to jump into all of them, but basically, I'm going to quickly sum up the Steve Englehart and Marshall Rogers story. It's weird. It's strange. It is different. You can totally tell that it's Englehart's writing style. Marshall Rogers, though, in the artwork, I saw some variations from what we're accustomed to, but I appreciated that because we can talk about Marshall Rogers all day on Batman and how he was phenomenal at drawing the Gotham landscape. Here, this is completely different. So for someone who's not too familiar with Marshall Rogers, you may be surprised a little bit, maybe, or not even know it's him. There's very few panels here that I could say, okay, I can see how Marshall Rogers did that. Where there's some city scenes and things in their first story. It's I don't want to spoil the story too much. It's a very weird tale. It's different. It's not a big two story at all. But I'll leave it at that. The Jim Starlin story, Amber. I love the old Jim Starlin art, without question. So Amber 3, yes, there is a part 1 and a part 2. So the part 1 was in Epic Illustrated 34, and then the second one was in Heavy Metal Magazine number 4 from 79.
Spread the wealth. Is
Yeah,
Amber?
Amber 3, it's called.
Is that?
Yep.
Yep.
It's a short story. It's a very dark tale told in a nursery rhyme by Jim Starlin.
Right, I remember this. I looked at it this morning. Yes,
it's very, very dark, and this is where you start getting into the maturity level of the kind of story that's being delivered here. But phenomenal Jim Starlin art. This is his wheelhouse. It's always dark, always something with death, or what have you. The one by is it Howard Cruz, if I'm remembering properly? That's an even darker tale, but drawn in a cartoonish way.
Yep.
And kind of making light of death. And just looking at it, you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to read it. It looks like a cartoon. But when you read it, you're like, oh, definitely a mature story. And then finally, the P. Craig Russell section of this magazine, there are no words. There's no script. It's just pure art, no inking. It's just strictly pencils. So the art is phenomenal. You can kind of follow along the story. You can fill in the blanks for yourself. However, I think the handicap here is that it suffers from no inking. Not being in color is fine, but it's kind of hard to pick up some of the things that he may have wanted you to see. Because when you're drawing in pencil, you may lose that when it goes to production.
It looked to me like there might have been a problem with the plates when they printed it.
Right.
So that's kind of where I kind of think, I don't know if that was the fault of Russell.
But you know what? Kudos to them for teaming up to do something like this. And unfortunately, the reason why you don't hear of Eclipse anymore is because with a lineup of creators like this, where they benefited more because these were kind of creator owned. But the problem with creator owned is that you're at their pace. So not only is it harder to organize and get all these things together, now you're dealing with a time frame where it's like, okay, can we get it all together in time for this next magazine? And if the answer is no, then what do you do next? So that's one of the things Eclipse suffered from, on top of the competition that they underwent during this time frame.
It is a little mature in places, and I don't have a problem with that. It's funny, we talked about the Shiner book being like a Playboy. This is even more evocative of that style, I suppose. I mean, girls are half naked, they're walking around in underwear, some of them. Professor, is this your first foray into black and white comics then?
A first deep dive really into getting ready for this podcast and kind of looking at all the different ways that you can create comics. That's why I really love 13's pick, because this gave me this is almost like a primer, right? Because it's creators that I am familiar with,
right,
in a format that I'm not quite familiar with. And then, of course, you throw these things. I actually read this story and thought it was very interesting and very dark at the end. Where, I loved the ending of that book, that story. But I actually, forgive me, but I know the books came to us the other day, but I didn't really look to see what I was actually supposed to be reading until this morning.
Me too.
But I was actually I was with Don McGregor yesterday, and he has lots of stories in Eclipse magazine. Not this particular issue, but they actually tell you next issue, Don McGregor's back with a story about kindergartners growing up in in preschool or whatever. But that was we were literally talking about those stories yesterday, and he has so many stories about Dean Mullaney, who was the owner and editor of Eclipse, and he's the one that put this out. And just talking about how, especially nowadays, 40 years later, Dean Mullaney is really responsible for a lot of the preservation work that's being done in comics today to preserve the comic strips and get them out there. Having Max Collins on this particular story, Max at the time that he wrote this was writing Dick Tracy. And so some of that stuff is, I love the whole inside baseball aspect of everything with Don, but he has a lot to say about this particular era in time. And sorry if I knew we were going to talk about Eclipse, I might have asked him for some sound bites to pass.
No, it's fine. Don's always welcome to join us anytime he feels up to it. For me, I'm used to black and white comics. I'm used to anthologies. Don't forget, this is 1981 when this book came out. We've been ruling the roost on this for a good 5-6 years beforehand, 2000 AD, which you could say is a precursor for this type of thing. 2000 AD doesn't have just sci-fi stories in. There's all different aspects of stuff going on in there. And there are other things other than Judge Dredd. I picked on this one, the Max Collins. Now, Max Collins, he wrote Dick Tracy, but he ended up becoming a really good horror writer as well as working on Batman later in the decade. I look at this panel, and all I can think of is Sin City by Frank Miller.
Yeah, I can see that.
And you think to yourself, oh, really? Because Frank Miller would be in Marvel at this time, was he not? He'd still be on Daredevil.
So this is what, 1981? Yeah, I mean he's at Marvel. I don't know. He might have been. Yeah, he's doing Daredevil in 81, I think. Yeah.
So that's I'm thinking. Is this the kind of inspiration that has led to Sin City? Some of the things we look at and we kind of file away in our memory banks until 10 years later, 15 years later, we draw something. I love the whole gumshoe element of this. It was proper cheesecake, proper gumshoe. I like how it doesn't. None of the stories shy away from the fact that it is adult. I mean, fair enough. You've got the graphic art that shows, half-naked women and all that sort of stuff. You've got the woman in her underwear in the previous story. But for as much as the art is fantastic in places, I think for me it's the tone of the writing across the board. This to me seems like writers who say, you know what? I'm not sticking to the rules. I want to see this, and this is what I'm going to put into it. And you know what? I'm going to write in a clever way so that if you don't get it, that's fine. Don't get it. I'm not writing for kids anymore. I'm writing for, I'm writing for adults. Those that sort of like, the people who still like comic book art but don't want to buy Playboy, I suppose. Because remember, Marvel at the time also had that magazine side, didn't they? Martin.
They had, in 79, 79 was around the time where Marvel jumped back in with both feet to do black and white mags. I don't know exactly how much more successful they were than the early 70s, but that's when we kind of. In fact, the book I'm doing is from 79. So,
ironically, my first foray into black and white books was Star-Lord with the old magazines.
I
used to read those as a kid.
I have some Star Wars weeklies, and Star-Lord is the backup strip. And so for those that don't know, Star Wars Weekly is just the regular Star Wars book that you get as the full color, but it get broken down into chapters. So instead of we get like 4, 5, 6 pages of Star Wars script, then it stops.
No, see, I said Star-Lord as in Peter Quill.
I know. And then at the back end of that book, there'll always be another sci-fi-esque type story. And on this particular issue, Star-Lord, I did hear you, was in there as well. So, black and white, as I say, to do a life for us back there.
Hey, just to get back on Eclipse for a second. So the reason you have so many big names on this book is Dean Malini attracted these guys. Write whatever you want. Whatever you write, I will publish. No
Right.
rules. And that's, that's something great. And, and the deadlines were not as harsh as Marvel's. So
I like how this is kind of a segue from our last episode with the comics code. This is a complete abandoning of the comics code.
Yep.
And in a great format. The black and white with these kind of tales, especially like the Jim Starlin one, it just helps bring like that ominence. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It really adds more. It's just another element to make the story much more darker, much more evil, if you will. I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
I was absolutely over the moon when I turned the first page and the letter I could sell straight away to Tomasz Kachowski. I was like, whoa,
Right.
I know that straight away. I've brought this page up, and this is the murderer's row of the creators of the book. They might not all appear in this one, but I would assume that they're going to be on there sooner or later. Engelhardt, we talked about. Galousi, love his form, brilliant. Trini Robbins, Steve Laiola, and again another very non-house style artist. I love his Spider-Woman stuff. Howard Cruz we talked about. Tom we've talked about. Don Matiz, Val Merrick, there's a name. Chris Brown, Hunt Emerson. On the other side, you've got Marshall Rogers, we've talked about. Steve Gerber.
Yep.
There's Don Free.
Hey, Don.
P. Craig Russell, we talked about. Max Allen Collins, which we talked about earlier. Starlin, Michael Golden, another non-house style artist who people love on Avengers Annual 10.
I love them on Micronauts. Yeah,
I was going to get there. It's like I know what I'm doing. It's on my first rodeo. Chris Claremont adding text pieces, as well as some writing down the line. So really, when you think about these are the characters, these are creators that Marvel entrusted to carry some of their biggest superhero books, and they're let loose. So, no, very impressive choice. Very impressive choice indeed. Cool. Right, time for a break before we jump into the next one. The next one is very comic code friendly. That's all I'm saying.
Such as it is.
I
would argue not comic code friendly.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that one. Because we're talking about everything black and white, I think it's time to add some color into our lives. Time for some K-pop.
Yay.
I just got a cramp from dancing.
I heard there's some lost footage of Johnny being the K-pop machine.
Well, Freya promised me when she did K-pop, she said there'll be fishnets on it. I've watched that ad shed loads of time. There's no fishnets.
False advertisement on Freya's part?
Well, I don't know, but still. Just looks like Power Rangers to music to me. What do I know? All right. Next up is this non-comic code friendly book. It is the Professor's first choice. This is The Tomb of Dracula #1 from October 1979. Right. There's a strange price differential on this. I managed to find out on eBay for around £10. However, you have to get it imported from Germany. So imagine the postage on that. Yeah. US Go Collect have a 9.6. Take a guess.
$10.
150.
$110.
Ooh.
$110. Yeah. Creator wise, Marv Wolfman,
Yep.
Gene Colan and Bob Larkin pretty much get the shout out for this one. I did find there's a distinct lack of creator credits on these books for some reason. I don't know if they're trying to wash their hands, I don't know, but still. Why this book, Professor?
Well, I mean, the obvious reason for me for this book is when we decided we were going to be talking about black and white comics, I wanted to pick an artist that to me just epitomizes both black and white and what they can do with it, to the point that if you ever see Colan's work in color, it kind of loses something. So I can tell you, and I've said this on the podcast before, when I was started reading comics, if I ever found like a Gene Colan book, I kind of just filed it away. I never really appreciated the artwork at the beginning of my reading career because I wasn't educated enough about certain artists and styles and what looked good to me as a young reader. I became a Gene Colan fan relatively late, and a lot of it was when I'm going to talk about Don again. But when I first met Don and he was showing me original artwork, he was showing me Gene Colan, and I looked at his black and white Gene Colan art, and I was like, this is amazing, and I got an education right there on the spot, and then.
Cool.
I started going back and looking at it. Now, the thing about Gene Colan's artwork is, I mean, if you looked at like the previous run of Tomb of Dracula, where he did the entire run in color, and it depends on who inks him, how it looks, because it really gets it gets lost in interpretation or lost in translation a lot of the times, depending on who's inking him. But here, we get Gene Colan. I think Bob McLeod's on inks here.
Yes.
And it just is it's just an amazing, like, what can you do with just two colors? Black and white and shades of gray. And the story, I mean, it's very cinematic. If you read it about Marv Wolfman's script here, it kind of is reminiscent of 80s horror movies where they introduce a bunch of characters and, horrible things happen to them throughout the book. But it's, at the beginning, you'd think someone's a main character, they're dead on page 10. And, they bring back, how do you bring back Dracula, as he died at the end of the color series. And now this is the black and white series that comes out, not even like 6 months later. And now they have to figure out a way to bring him back. But, hey, it's Dracula, so pretty easy to bring him back. But just to, they spend a lot of time introducing these characters, and then of course they introduce Dracula, and then that bad things are going to happen. And to me, there's a within the magazine format, the black and white format, you have more time to tell your story. And this particular story is, I think it's like a 48 pager. So they tons of time to kind of get the plot out there, get the script out there.
Gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
Unbelievable. Look at that.
Honestly, this is the best looking book we're looking at today. This when I talk Sean and the She-Devil and Marvel black and white books, this is the style that I'm talking about, the kind of grayscale. It's not just black and white, it is the depth of color.
This is looks like 3D
grayscale. It's gorgeous.
Unbelievable. So that, it really, you read the book and it's very wordy. So, I'll give Marv Wolfman credit there. He's always wordy, but he doesn't really cover up the art. When you're looking through it, it's a dense story. and just you have to go through when you finish this book, you have to go back through and flip through the art. You just have to just to look at his work. And these are the kind of books that when I look, it's really kind of made me more of an art fan, all around, um, just the composition of how the page is slayed out. And I mean, you're looking at that page, and what are you drawn to? You're drawn to the cross, right? And it's just amazing how he can just draw your eyes to what he wants you to look at. And to me, I think nobody did it better. I think still, I don't think anybody's replaced him.
This is a great page, definitely. What the cross is impressive, but the thing that gets me, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it's the shading on the guy's leg here. This is a black and white comic. Yep. So you've got the background, you've got him in the foreground, and he's still got enough depth of grey in there to show the shadow of where the light source is and how it's impacted. And it translates all the way through, so you don't see, because the light's over here somewhere, there probably if it's casting a shadow. But then you don't see Dracula's outfit other than the stuff that you see on top, because that's all the light can hit. Such a clever use of the light source and how that shows in just a simple black and white comic,
or just the illusion of light in that.
Exactly.
So it's crazy.
The shading there on her face. 13th, Gene Colan. Do you think he's an artist? Is he the par excellence of black and white?
I was just going to use my analogy that you can have major leaguers, but then there's all-stars. Right. However you want to use it, there's football players or pro bowlers. This is major leagues here. And this is worlds apart from his Spider-Man work that I'm familiar with. And to Bud's point, I agree with him wholeheartedly on this. I think he functions better as a black and white artist, and this totally looks like this is his wheelhouse.
Yep.
You're sold on that immediately. And, personally, I hate vampires. I think they suck.
Hey.
No, I'm being serious.
I don't think there's a lot of bite in their stories, no.
Yeah, exactly. But, seriously, though, I'm not into vampires and werewolves too much. But in recently, I'm starting to try to appreciate more horror books. So giving this one a whirl, it's exactly like what you guys said. I felt like I was part of the movie. And Marv Wolfman's script is phenomenal, but the artwork just really kind of it doesn't overthrow the script, but the support is just it's symbiotic, is what it is, and you feel like you're part of the story. And you're getting a dense look at these characters, to like what Bud said, but it's part of the story. You have to find out what's happening. You can't just have Dracula appear out of nowhere. There has to be a background story to this, and by the time you get further along down the story, you're sold into all the characters but Dracula. And I think that adds to more of the effect of what this book is about. It's not just about Dracula. It's about the people that are around, why they want to find out about him, trying to get away from him, the horror aspect, the glimmer of hope. Sometimes it looks like there's no hope at all. This has everything in here, and it's an excellent pick. It's an excellent magazine. I just wish they did more of these.
That was the not comics code scene that Johnny kind of flew through.
Well, the naked woman there.
Yeah, the little bit of a naked lady there for a few pages.
Well, you know what? I'm all right with that. It's a vampire story. I think probably for a lot of people, their first foray into eroticism was probably vampires and the succumbing of the maiden.
I don't know. I don't know how a vampire story or a traditional vampire story like this would fly these days. With the women characters end up pretty kind of run through the mill.
Well, I don't know if that's part
I just think it's amazing how probably Gene Colan read the script and envisioned this is what the words look like.
Oh, look at that tempo.
It's absolutely amazing.
One of the things that, and I'm not sure who to blame for this, one of the things that kind of catches my eyes is the deviance between the text bubbles and the monologue bubbles. the kind of the sort of dialogue versus the monologue, and
Yeah.
they're not afraid of mixing that up. I mean, we see that in modern day comics now, where the panels are colored a certain color to match the character outfit or costume.
Well, that's more of like the black and white contrast too. So
Definitely. Well, there we go. Some more neck biting. Check it out.
The narrator is Vincent Price.
Yeah.
No, it's good stuff, and you know, a lot of Marv Wolfman stuff I can take it or leave it, but this was really kind of good. I really enjoyed this particular book. I bought into all the characters. I like in 48 pages. I kind of cared about all the characters too. So you know, when they're whether or not it was their demise that came out, I was like, well, all right. Oh, hey, yeah, and then of course we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about after that.
I mean, so after the comic book strip, it's a magazine format, so you get
Franklin
articles.
Jella Beefcake shut.
Yeah. Ooh. I've got to say, I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed this book. This was a great choice. When you talked about black and white comics, I said earlier, this is the style that I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's kind of adult in the way that it's portrayed. There's no corners cut. It's very much we're doing a horror story. It's going to look like a horror story. It's going to look like a gothic horror story. The black and white serves really well on that. Could they get away with it being a vampire book with no red blood? Probably. But as you said, there was a color version before this. So
there's no real blood in the book at all.
I think you get your money's worth with this magazine right here.
Yep.
At the time,
$1.25 that you're spending. The thing, like and like I mentioned before, Colin's artwork is really easy to mess up if you get the wrong inker, and I think Bob McLeod did a really good job inking Colin on this. The other inker that does a great job on Colin's work is Tom Palmer, but Tom Palmer makes everybody look better.
Yeah.
There are plenty of inkers I've seen that didn't know what to do with Colin's artwork and didn't know how to ink them. I think Vince Colletta comes to mind, where he made Gene Colin's artwork unbearably bad. So, I don't think it was ever Colin's fault. The fault of whoever colored the book or inked it. So
yeah, I think sometimes, I think to try and fit a medium like a color comic book, I think you do it. Sometimes you lose some of the rawness of what the artist was trying to portray. And
absolutely,
I think that can kind of get lost. So sometimes it's good to go back and look at the black and whites.
Yeah.
It's funny because I know DC do a range and Marvel do a range of those essential books, where they take all the color off them and stick them in like a volume like this thick. I've got Robin and Batgirl one downstairs, 2 separate volumes, and the Batgirl one looks better than the Robin one does for some reason. I don't know, maybe it's a Batgirl thing, but you would have thought with just again black and white, how can you get away with so much? All right, next up, last up, in fact, is a choice, and I was kind of umming and ahhing about which one to go with, and I know probably everyone expecting me to go Shana, but lack of a comic book kind of stopped that. So I did some research. I found this little beauty, and this one's for Al Mega, because he's always whinging on about something or other. Well, Al's always whinging on about how there's no Puerto Rican superheroes. So this is the first appearance of the White Tiger. Al, this is just for you, sir. Just for you indeed. This is the Deadly Hands of Kung Fu number 19 from November 1975. eBay, you can get this. Mid-grade, not great grade. £355. On Go Collect, a 9.6 will cost you $1,200.
Really?
Yeah. It's like
now this isn't the first appearance of Iron Fist, right? Or is it?
No.
It's the first appearance of White Tiger.
White Tiger. Yes.
But why? I mean, I don't think White Tiger is that big of a character to command that.
Don't say that. I will fire you if you keep dissing the White Tiger.
Sorry, Al. Just going with
So this is a twofold story on this one. This is the reprint version we're looking at. Hence, you've got the new modern Marvel logo down there. First book is "Shall I Love the Bird of Fire," written by everyone's favorite mutant writer, Chris Claremont. Excuse me. Art and inks are by Rudy Nebres. Letters are by Marcos Pellior. Second one, which is where old Tiger Chops turns up, is written by Bill Mantlo, with Yvette Perez on some scripting. George Perez is on art. I'll surprise you a little bit about that one. Ink is Jack Abel and letters are Karen Mantlo. Everyone's keeping it in the family. Who'd have thunk it? So it seems. Right. I was surprised why there's no Shang-Chi in this.
He's on the cover.
Yeah, not great. Yeah. So a bit of history on this one, I suppose. Back when this came out, a certain Mr. Bruce Lee was tearing up in the cinemas, and people wanted to get down with the whole new kung fu craze. And this is Marvel's version of getting into that, I suppose. 19 issues in, that's not bad going. But of course, Shang-Chi was a major pull for that he was their kung fu hero, especially when you got Doug Munch and Paul Gulaussi on it and later issues. But there you go. So here we go. I'm not sure. I didn't mind the art in this one. It's not as deep as the Colin book. The Colin book is texture upon texture. This just seems like, well, we'll try and give it texture, but it doesn't always work. It is busy. You've got the contrast of the letterboxes going on. Is it a good introduction to Iron Fist or what Iron Fist is all about? Well, all the men, talks about couldn't run that lot. Got other stuff going on. The martial art elements work, I think, just about, maybe. And again, lots of crowd scenes, lots of we want to be good, we want to be adult for our own sake, but I'm not sure it works quite as well as previously. 13th, what was your take on this first story before we look at the second?
For the Iron Fist story, like anybody that's out there drawing martial arts, it's very tough because it has to be fluid, it has to be kinetic, it has to be sort of cinematic for you to get sold on the type of moves that are being done. Otherwise, by the end of the move, it's completely lost. So therefore, goes your effect out the window and probably 1 or 2 pages burned. So in here, I agree with a point that the art isn't probably the best you've ever seen, but I think it does the job. And I think that the main thing with this type of story is to convey the origin of Iron Fist, because for those that couldn't get the Marvel Premiere Iron Fists, this was probably their first introduction into Iron Fist in a magazine. Plus, it's in black and white. Maybe you're expecting some little increase in maturity. Either way, I think this is more of an emphasis on Iron Fist, who he's about, because he was fairly new at this time. And to your point, the Kung Fu craze was, going on. So it's an okay story. I enjoy Iron Fist. I'm not a diehard fan. I think this story is pretty much sums up Iron Fist on what he is, what he deals with. Some of the cinematic scenes or the fight scenes are okay. I just think that where the artwork suffers is kind of like as if you're a cameraman and you're in too close for some scenes and way too far back for others. There's really not a happy balance. And I think that's where the artwork suffers. So that's what I see looking throughout this book.
I don't recognize the name Rudy Nebres, but when I look at this, it reminds me a lot of Neil Adams trying to do that elongated kind of pose. 13th, you're a regular Marvel guru.
Bud.
Sorry, Bud, even. Sorry.
So, I was just looking up Rudy Nebres because I have heard of Nebres before, but that's because I read a lot of stupid trade publications and they talk about him as So they talk well, they talk about him as one of the kind of like an envelope pushing artist. Like a lot of them look at him as kind of like a source of inspiration, and they look at his work to inspire their own work. So
Really?
he's a Filipino comics Inkwell Award winner. He's yeah. So, sorry, I'm trying to look to see what exactly it was he's famous for. He's in the Joe Sennett Hall of Fame. Guys, I mean, for something like so he's a House of Mystery, House of Secrets, Savage Tales. So a lot of the stuff maybe we might not have heard of him. Kind of like a
you know what? I could see him as a horror artist for House of Secrets,
Yeah.
something like that. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm not gonna lie. Halfway through this book, I can't. Where was the panel? I think he wasn't wearing his mask. I was like, yeah, there you go. I was thinking to myself, is this dead man? What's going on here?
Yeah.
You know.
So from 1980 to 1983, exactly, creepy, eerie, Vampirella. So did a lot of he did a lot of all of that kind of stuff. But here I was just and I think we see this more in the next story. I think there's two ways to draw martial arts scenes, and it's kind of like this, where it's a jumble of images, and then the other way in the next story, like move by move, I think that it suffers because you're trying to focus on the martial artwork, so that's tricky, like 13 said about being able to like maybe show like the proper way that they should be doing their kicks and strikes, right? But I think it suffers because there's it kind of eliminates the backgrounds, right? They spend a lot of time not drawing backgrounds, but then just drawing the fight. So I think that suffers a little bit because of that. So then you don't get the layering that we saw in the Tomb of Dracula story. Cool. So you basically just get a lot of sketch work. And at that point, particularly.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. second half of this book is George Perez, and I'm going to say, you guys know I'm not a Perez fan, but I was quite impressed with some of this work. Absolutely. I love that panel. That panel works really well. Typical Perez poses there, camera angles. That could have been any Teen Titans scene in there, perhaps. I don't know. It seems like a pared down version of the Perez that we know and love, and I quite like that. I quite like the simpler lines as opposed to the heavier stuff that the color would probably bring that onto.
This is before he does any of the FF or Avengers stuff. So, but right before. So he's kind of polishing up. I think he's polishing up and getting ready for the jump.
Yeah. That is not how you do a flying kick, allegedly. But then, fight scenes are in comics all the way, So I know we say things like Batman's the martial artist, and same with Lady Shiva. Karate Lad 13 and
Karate
Kid, Lad Kid, whatever. So yeah, I didn't mind this so much. You're right; it is a bit step by step in places, but the big
it's almost like a how-to, because if you flip through at the end of the book, there's like an ad for Chuck Norris, it's like that.
Oh my god! But those panels work well. These panels work brilliantly.
Yeah.
And then of course the big reveal at the end is the White Tiger. 13th, are you a White Tiger fan? Without,
I'm not a diehard fan. I think he's great.
I think you're mixing that up with Tony the Tiger, mate. Don't get all frosty on us, will you?
Perhaps. I agree with you. I think George Perez here, it's interesting look at his early work. Without a doubt, I think the guy mastered facial expressions So that's going to be attractive to get you on a big book like FF later on. I think he mastered the drawing women for sure. The hair, it's phenomenal. And again, the facial expressions that go with that. This was definitely a of its time, as we always say, right? With the styles, the bell bottoms and everything like that. So it's a reflection of city life at that point in time, and then the kung fu craze, like we keep talking about. I think that the martial arts scenes in here, I think it's more straightforward than in the previous story for George Perez.
Yeah.
As far as the Sons of the Tigers, they're disbanding in this issue. I think that was kind of the significant moment here, and because as a result of that, that's how you get the original Hector Ayala, Bronze Tiger, White Tiger.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter. It's being at the right place at the right time for him to get the mystical amulets. So we'll see him more down the road, and it's kind of the start of something new. It was a new idea, something to trot out there. I don't view as the Sons of the Tiger as this Hall of Fame comic book team. So obviously White Tiger has been replaced by other characters throughout time. So yeah, the White Tiger character in itself has survived over the years. So it's an interesting thing to go back in time and kind of see, like, how did this all start? So are we going to look back in time and kind of find out, wow, this is how the White Tiger started? Because he only gets really one panel in here. You're not learning anything about him other than he just found jewelry outside.
Yeah.
Or are you looking at this from the perspective of the Sons of the Tiger? I've heard of them. What happened? Well, this answers that for you.
Cool. It's interesting. I think if you take a hard, sorry, Professor, anything to add? I missed you on that one.
I just wasn't really impressed with the whole origin of the Hector Ayala White Tiger. As he finds the necklace in the dumpster. It's like, I don't know.
No, okay.
It's a little weak.
Yeah.
I think that last page with the White Tiger and then the actual tiger in the background, if you take the words away, would make an awesome T-shirt.
Yeah.
No, it's good artwork. Yeah, Perez. Yeah. I have nothing bad to say about Perez. Perez is great.
That's just to put this in there so you can see it again.
I would say I think Perez's work looks better in color.
Yeah, maybe. I agree. The thing I was going to mention is I found it quite. If we look at the pod as a whole, if we have a look at what we've looked at, we've had a look at an artist who we know is going to become an absolute superstar at the start of his career. We've looked at the master at work in Gene Colan. And we looked at a bunch of creators who have said, you know what? We're already big names, so let's do what we want to do. It's interesting how the black and white market can allow for such diverse journeys for creators.
Yeah.
You can be slap bang in the middle. You can be trying out your style so you can wait for that big gig, or you can enjoy having your big gigs and could do this as a side hustle. And I think that's kind of unique. I think Marvel have maybe and the companies that use black and white comics, I think they've maybe missed a trick in recent years, and this is where the independent market has probably flourished because these people have now moved away from black and white, and now companies are doing these kind of esoteric books left, right, and center. And I mean, let's not forget The Walking Dead's not exactly a color book,
right?
And that's huge.
Marvel has been doing those black, white, and red books for the last couple of years, and some of the best artwork I've seen the last couple of years have come out of those Star Wars books. So
there's some. I know, Johnny, you can cover your ears if you want, but there's some really good Grendel stories in black and white. But then you also have those black, white, and reds and things like that get gimmicked to death now.
Well, I think I've got a signed Batman comic that started the whole black and white trend for DC at least. So yeah, I've got a signed comic somewhere.
The Turtles was also black and white. Yeah.
So I mean, there is legs in black and white. You've just got to get the right story, the right medium to get that across. I think we've kind of proven that. So interesting indeed. In fact, I think next time we've already kind of talked about what we're going next time. I think my next book's a black and white one as well. If I'm thinking,
You'll have to remind me what we're doing next time.
Oh well, we'll see. All right, that's it. 3 up, 3 down. Talk about everything that's black and white. No, don't buy them and color them in. Whatever you do. Professor, it's been an absolute blast.
Thank you, sir.
13, thank you for joining us.
Of course, my pleasure.
Indeed. No, our pleasure, sir. Our pleasure. Don't forget to check out the UCPM for all your favorite shows, including Professor.
No Price Podcast, all about Disney Plus, the MCU, and we managed to talk about some Marvel comics.
I heard a new rumor about Ahsoka this today. The Inquisitor is the Star Killer from the Force Awakens game.
Okay.
That's what I heard, but what do I know?
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler. I don't know. And of course, TDC, the Definitive Crusade, started by that guy.
Mm-hmm.
That guy.
Yeah, right direction. Guy. There you
go. Yeah. They're still running loud and proud. And talking about DC, it's fitting to mention that on the day of recording of this pod, it was announced that Arlene Sorkin had passed away. And for all you DC fans and basic anyone who knows anything about comic books, Arlene is, of course, the original voice for Harley Quinn. So our condolences to her family, and thank you for giving us such a well-voiced, well-versed multimedia character to rival practically anybody on the planet. So well
isn't Harley Quinn's real name Harleen?
Yeah, it is. So. Apparently, Harley is based on Arlene in some ways, according to Paul Dini. So there you go. Okay, there you go. I've been your host, Johnny Machine Hughes. As always, adios.